Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the 2023 Hack Summit. It's a privilege for me to be here with Evan Cheng, who's the co-founder of Mysten Labs, which is creating Sui, which is a next-generation blockchain. And it's just a pleasure to have you here. I know how busy you are right now with your launch. I just want to thank you for spending time with us and to help educate the developers in the audience today. So thank you, Ed.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to speak with you, Ed.
Great. Um, so I think just to get everyone on the same page, what might be helpful is some background. So let's start with your background a little bit, Evan. I think just getting to know you might be helpful for the audience. So maybe you could talk a little bit about what your background was before you started Mysten Labs and what led you to create the project that you're building right now.
Not your typical crypto background. I've been in tech for I think 26 years. Did a couple of startups early in my career, then spent majority my kind of my prime times with big companies. First was Apple for 10 years, and then with Facebook Meta for 6.5 years. So built a bunch of stuff. Some of them are wildly used in every aspect. Pretty much every phone, every smart TV, every watch and device, everything runs or touches on some of the software I've shipped in the past. So I'm always interested in sort of transformative technology that they make a huge difference. So kind of build a reputation in the industry, being one of those kind of people who like complexity, who like to tackle hard problems. So when I got involved with crypto, this is back in, let's say 2017, 2018. You know, I think I was able to build some kind of relationship, some presence in the space, you know, help with some of the startup a bit. And I thought about back in 2018 of doing a startup or joining a startup, but ultimately decided to stay within Facebook to lead sort of the R&D side of the house around a few critical areas for the Libra DM project. And that's how I formally kind of got into the space. The reason I did that is I took the long-term view. I believe there's a lot of technology need to be built out, a lot of infrastructure that I believe are not ready for prime time. It's still the case. So I need the kind of experts to really be able to kind of move the field forward significantly. So that's why I decided to stay at Facebook, kind of a take on the Libra project.
That's fantastic. And it's funny, like I've actually used the LLVM compiler that you helped work on back at Apple, and as a developer, I really admired that work. So your technical expertise is just incredible. So what led to you leaving Facebook, I guess, to start Mysten Labs, and what is the
Yeah,
problem that Mysten is trying to solve in the world? Like what is the status quo problem that
sure.
exists within some of the blockchains out there?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So let me touch on uh, the first part of your question. Why did I leave Facebook? So Libra project was very ambitious, perhaps too ambitious on some parts, um, but as in other area, it wasn't ambitious enough. So it was meant to be essentially this global payment rail, which is hugely ambitious, but as a platform that does limit on the design, right? If it's a permission model, if it's meant to be for sort of all the service provider, financial service provider use it, everything's custodial. It's not really a developer platform. There's a lot of restrictions. So those were the things that we struggled with while we're building Libra, DM, and we learned a lot from that experience. And it's always my co-founder and I always want to do more, do better, really have this permissionless open platform, but at the same time to kind of allow kind of these use cases require guardrails, such as payments, such as a lot of asset management, as we learned, maybe even for NFT tradings, or kind of collectible, right? Are collectible. So that's sort of a lot of the thinking around that, right? We learn a lot, and we realize at towards the end of my time at Facebook and Novi, I realized the perhaps the only way I can get it done right, is to do it myself. So my co-founder, I basically decide within a day, yeah, this is the team of us. We're going to go out and do something big. And what that big was, we at least at that time had a general idea all the different issues that present in the blockchain space. But it takes a few months to get to the point where we actually figure out what suite would look like. And what we set out to do wasn't just another blockchain, right? Not just another blockchain that scales better. We think there's a fundamental issue with the usability as a developer platform for all the product builder that want to kind of get into Web3, to use. And taking a step back, what is Web3, right? It's ultimately getting the internet back to more peer-to-peer model, right? It's more coordination between, content producers, creators, consumers, and the middlemen, right? It's about this intermediary. Right now everything goes through a middleman, and the big platforms, the Instagram, TikTok, YouTube of the world squeeze all the profit out of them. And now again, the app distribution platform of the Apple and the Google of the world are now squeezing profit out of them, right? So everybody's squeezing everyone else. And I think a lot of the sort of the pioneer, the early developer that involved with the internet, a lot of people feel like this is wrong. This is the wrong direction to go, and we need to do something better. And our view is a public blockchain, a programmable public blockchain, will serve as a key building block to get internet back to more peer-to-peer coordination, right? So it's really about handing the control of the assets, the creation, and the distribution of this creation back in the hands of the people really matters, right? The creators and consumers. The middleman gets a cut, but they shouldn't control everything. So looking at that, looking at what happened with, for example, the NFT, where the marketplace are deciding whether to honor royalty payments. It tells you exactly what's wrong with the space today, how broken the technology is, right? If you cannot have the platform sort of like honor the rules the creator put in place when you transfer assets, you're fundamentally broken, right? If your assets don't actually capture all the important information or data about the asset, right? Think about it, right? A trading card with, I don't know, random, so a trading card, let's say a baseball card, right? There's one baseball card, two baseball cards. They're identical, except the second one has a signature of the player. It's worth a lot more. What's equivalent that additional set of information that's part of that make an asset, right? And look at what we have today in the EVM model with NFT. That's broken, right? You cannot capture additional information. The information lives off chain. They don't have ways to capture all this information, capture value, make one thing different from another. Even before you talk about utility and everything else, the technology is broken. So we set up to build Suite, not just a faster, cheaper, whatever the narrative it is today, right? We want something that is a great developer platform that solve developer problem, the product problem that actually serve consumers. So that is sort of the long answer to your question, but it's give you some insight on how we think about things.
That makes complete sense. Thanks, Evan. And as you started to create Sui, how much of the technology that you created and open sourced at Facebook was reusable out of the box, and how much of it did you have to build with your new team as you spun out of Facebook?
So we knew we want to use Move. This is a language my co-founder Sam designed it and led the team to build, and we're very proud of the work. It was built to be cross-platform in the first place. We knew that's one foundational piece. but everything else we want to rebuild from the ground up because we view the way the blockchain is being built are wrong, right? The rigid model of forming blocks and doing total ordering of all the transactions in a block, and then execute them, then writing all the effects into a global state is the wrong way to do things, right? It is very, very wasteful on the number front. So we understand how that's wrong. So we knew we need to basically build everything from the ground up, even move right after we figuring out the programming model, the data model. We changed significantly, right, to make a more. There's not a good way to, we have a lot of debate. Is this object oriented? It's not really object oriented, right? Because we don't have dynamic dispatch, we don't have inheritance, right? But it has the same flavor for people who understand, right? So because now the programming model is more familiar, right? You passing asset as inputs, you producing asset as output, right? That creates opens all kinds of possibilities. Like a lot of the challenge other existing model have, right? Any kind of address-based model, program model, and the sort of solidity model, right? You can't even pass additional information in a way. Say, if I want to do this additional check, what is it I'm looking for, right? That you end up having to do levels interaction to make things very complicated, or you do provide interface, and interface allow you to create sort of poison implementation that you conforms to interface and then actually do bad things, right? So all those things we feel like wrong, right? So a lot of things that move give us a great foundation, but the everything we redesign basically everything else from the ground up.
That's great.
Including the way we use Move. Yeah.
Can you tell the audience a little bit more about Move and some of the features of Move? And like, does it support like interface inheritance versus implementation inheritance, or does it support neither of them? What language is it closest to, and what are some of the nice things language?
Right. I see people saying Move is a subset of Rust. It's not, right? It's got some elements of Rust, right? Because people see it as the linear type. It's being big part of it. So what is Move? I'm probably not the best person to describe it, but I will talk about the high level, right? The first thing we understand, when you talk about a programming language, right? You got to understand what the programming language is meant for, right? Because so what is smart contract about? It's about a language that manipulate assets, right? And these assets sits on the blockchain, right? So you have the repository or database of assets. That's a blockchain. And you have a programmability that you have the language to manipulate them. As simple as that, right? In a lot of ways, right? And you got to keep them safe, right? So first, most important thing is asset has a first class citizen, first class concept. Make it easy to describe assets, right? And these assets can be arbitrary type, right? That's sort of familiar kind of concept in programming language. Struct, you describe the type, right? Can be 5 fields, can be 10 fields, can be some fields are mutable, some fields are immutable, different types and all that, right? And the type can be published, right? So you can define standards through types. And then what are other things that's important, right? Well, you want to have some level of enforcement of ownership. It's very, very critical, right? You don't want to leave a lot of these things to the developers to get right. For example, you don't arbitrarily drop asset, right? It shouldn't just disappear, right? You cannot create asset on a thin air, right? There's got to be rules about it. You cannot transfer asset or double spend, right? When you don't have it, right? You cannot duplicate them, right? So these rules are somewhat different from traditional programming model where you integer, or anything you can copy them, right? So a lot of these things are very different. So that's where the borrow semantics again, right? Rust pioneered a linear type, pioneered it. So people say that there's a familiarity. So that's important. And then other things, right? And people also ask us, well, why don't you take, say, for example, Rust and add make a subset of it or add some feature, a superset subset, right? Leverage the existing developer tools and all that. We thought about those things, right? But the reality is, right, then you have to add instrumentation. then you have to have runtime enforcement of a lot of these rules. You have borrow checker, which theoretically you use Rust for. You have a lot of these things where once you make all these major surgery, a lot of things don't work anyway, right? You can't just take existing program language. You got to design something right for it. So that's the path we took with Move. And then there's a lot to talk about, but I'll give you some of the high level kind of a design decision concept about it. Sam has a better description of that. I think it's a language for um, what was it? It kind of dropped it kind of escaped my head for a second. So might come back to me later. Yeah, but yeah,
Sounds
but that's the basic of a Move. Yeah.
Your answer is actually very timely because we actually had an audience question that is relevant to what you just said, actually, which is if you were to compare a general purpose programming language like any WebAssembly compatible language or Rust, and you compare that to like a domain specific language that's specific to Web3 and the blockchain, the question here is hinting at, are there advantages that we get by using a language that's more tuned and tailored for Web3?
I think there's a couple of things here. Right? First, I think people are misunderstanding what domain-specific language is. Right? In a way, it is, but in a way, it's not. Right? If depends on how you define Web3. Right? The way we think about it is, it's a language for manipulating assets. It's a language for scarcity. Right? So that's a very different concept that doesn't exist in general programming language, right? Which you can create things out of thin air, right? Because that's fundamentally very different. You're modeling assets. Now, in terms of domain, what it can be used for, it can be financial systems, products, can be gaming, can be social, can be any number of things. So in a lot of ways, we think it's quite general purpose, right? But you have this constraint, right? You fundamentally have an interface with a ledger, right? To track the history and be a repository for the asset you're manipulating, and then it's centered around asset, right? So that part make it somewhat domain specific, right? So, and to answer your question, right? Because the restriction here, because we're working on things that has value, the language working on some things value, it is very, very critical for the language, the tools to be able to support that, right? And again, if you use a general purpose language, you have to add all kinds of guardrails on how do you ensure no double spend, things don't get dropped on the floor, right? Gas metering, all these sort of things that you have to deal with. Or at a deeper level, a lower level, well, aliasing, right? That's concept. How do you deal with? What if you have that, right? So again, we went through this process. We realized, no, you cannot use a general purpose language because you're going to end up with essentially a foot gun, right? Language is very, very powerful. If you get it right, you have a dynamic behavior. People will manipulate the dynamic behavior for bad things, right? We've seen this over and over and over again. Reentrancy bug is still one of the most dominant, issues on Solidity and EVM. It's never going to get solved, right? Hackers are always going to be able to find the loophole, right? And if you cannot fundamentally statically analyze your program to prove it's correct, you are not going to be good enough to replace human in the middle, to disintermediary, right? So think about that for a second. The important role here for blockchain, for Web3, is about replacing intermediary with program. And that program has to be absolutely trustful. You have to trust 100%. If you not get there, you still need that layers of protection that human in the middle provides, right? That very much going to be the path forward for a long time. But think about, can we even ever get there, right? Even at a smaller scale. If you cannot get there, you fail, right? So this is the problem. Like from day one, I have very, very big issue with Solidity and EVM, right? Because you will finally fail in a lot of way. You have interfacing here, kind of problem, right? Again, we have a saying, right? In a world where code is law, interface is crime, right? If you have that, you fail. You have dynamic behavior, you will entrancy, right? Doesn't matter how clever you are, you can never get to the point of 100% assurance, right? You're never going to be able to be the intermediary for something that's massive, right? So I think a lot of sort of people are talking about getting excited about, real world assets, right? Like these other bigger asset class to onto the blockchain. There's always a lot of interest, but guess what? They always end up using a completely permissioned kind of infrastructure for a reason. There's that trust issue. There's a control issue. Do the human have the lever, the emergency lever to, to sort out problems, right? So that's a huge problem here. And if you get some of these things right, you kind of shot yourself, in the head from the beginning. So again, a long question to a long answer to your question. Hopefully that makes sense.
That's very helpful. Thank you. One other question from the audience is, it seems like Sui might be a pretty good fit for GameFi. Do you agree with that? And what other verticals are you thinking about for Sui?
So Sui has a completely different concept in terms of the primitive, the building block, right? So if you think about it, tokens is very, very basic, right? So people talk about tokenization, all that. What do token represent? Ownership in some asset that's already fully formed and complete, right? Coin is easy, but NFT is one of those examples, right? You store almost everything off chain, right? So the on-chain representation doesn't change, right? Tokenize real estate, all that's basically make the assumption, the asset doesn't undergo change. You don't have this asset will themselves mutate and change over time. They doesn't take on more information. You cannot, aggregate more information into the asset. They cannot undergo change, right? And that is just fundamentally wrong. And that is very, very wrong when it comes to stateful application like games, right? If you think about you as a developer mental model, think about what you're doing in game, complex, right? A character will undergo changes inside the game. A freaking virtual car should get a laser, right? Once you reach on top of the roof, once you get to level 20 or something, right? These are changes. Your assets are not static, not when you create them. So this is why a lot of gaming companies are coming to Sui, right? Because they see this difference, right? While all the blockchain using token as an underlying building block, where object that's richer, right? So you fully encapsulate all the information there, right? You don't have to think about what metadata, separation of metadata ownership, right? Can be all in one, right? And you can actually have composability, right? Because the asset can compose together. A car is one asset, a laser gun is another asset. You just literally like put them together, right? Becomes one asset. So all these things make gaming developer very, very excited. And that's why we have such a, relatively easy time, even while we're early, right? To get a lot of builder to build on us, build on Sui. But it's not restricted to gaming, right? Gaming is just sort of great showcase and early entry in this, right? This is going to be used for every type of application, right? In social, everyone you tweet becomes an object by itself, right? Persistent, right? And not restrict to a platform. Commerce, think about NFT, but go beyond. What if an NFT that the brand can control and change and push information to the holder, right? That's much, much bigger than the NFT today, right? Think about NFT that start out as a coupon, but become a royalty card, becomes a way to distribute rewards to consumer, right? The example on and on and on, right? If you think beyond this mental model of token, something that's very, very like a casino chips and very static, you realize Web3 is a lot broader. There's a lot of other opportunities. And this is why we see ourselves Sui being sort of transformative for all different verticals.
Thank you, Evan. I think the audience is pretty excited. We've had a few developers in the audience just talk about how impressed they've been and how they want to get into Sui. If there are developers in the audience that want to get involved, what would you recommend to them? What are resources for them, and how can they forward their knowledge about Sui and any suggestions for the audience?
Well, I mean, the easiest way, right? You get started by going to Sui.io, look at all the documentation, the examples, and all that. Go into the Discord. We have a very, very vibrant developer community in our Discord, which is huge, right? We are Sui Discord is almost 700,000 people big, which I believe make it one that probably top 20 or 30 Discord in the world. Period. So very active, and there are actually other Telegram groups for some of the OG Sui developers are in a Telegram group. And there's a lot of other communities out there, and also the Sui Foundation have kind of builder houses. They just finished this year. There has been three. One was earlier this year they had one in Denver, which is very, very popular, followed by one that just concluded in Vietnam. Hong Kong builder house is coming up, right? That's another great resource to get to know people in real world. So there is a lot, just resource out there. Follow us on Twitter. There's a massive amount of information. The exciting things about Sui right now is we're constantly seeing other parties, right? They're not affiliated with either Mysten or Sui Foundation are out there, kind of doing events and getting the enthusiasts and developer together. And that's exciting. That is when people talk about decentralization, that is the essence of decentralization, right? So lots and lots of resources out there, but I will start with Sui.io as well as the Discord.
Thank you. And I guess there's one other startup right now building on the Move programming language, which is Aptos. And would you view Aptos as competitive to Sui, or is it complementary? And how would you think about the comparison?
Yeah, obviously everybody's competing, right, for the eyeballs and the attention of developers, who in turns are serving the consumers, right? And if you look at all the, if you assume all the blockchain could basically do the same thing, you say all the layer ones are competitors, all the layer twos are competitors, layer ones, right? All these things are competitor in a lot of way, but in a way, we see ourselves as, we really don't pay that much attention to them. We think more people, more developer using Move is generally a good thing. We believe what developer can do on Sui is quite significantly beyond what other blockchains can do. So we really don't really worry too much about it, right? It's good to have competition over time, and especially at this stage, right? With the whole Web3 space is at best a lot of experimentation, right? People are still trying to figure out what works, right? It's not something you can follow a playbook and say this is how you build a successful Web3 service or product, right? So the more developer in the space, the better. That's the way we look at it.
Great. And I guess if you were to look at the future of Sui over the next 5 to 10 years, what kind of infrastructure would you like to see built out within the Sui ecosystem? And I'm asking the question because there are developers in the audience that want to build a startup. So what are the pieces of the Sui ecosystem today that could?
That's a great question, right? I think unclear because not to the level of details that might be immediately give you an idea of how to build a sort of tooling or infrastructure startup on top of Sui. A lot of the ideas has been tried already that on other blockchains, they work, right? We have RPC service provider, we have people provide developer tooling, no code, zero code. Tools would be very powerful, especially when you talk about specific domains, right? But there feel like a lot of things are still missing. We have a developer that's working on, kind of new kind of standard, kind of like NFT, but much bigger, right? I think there are people working on a concept like capsule, sort of more dynamic and living kind of NFT, so to speak, right? These are building blocks for gaming. When you talk about gaming, there's a ton of other opportunities out there in terms of infrastructure. If you imagine, right, large-scale games to live on a blockchain, even the best blockchain, you're still going to have a cost disadvantage over database, right? How do you build that caching layer, right? If you want to have massive amount of throughput, you want to touch hundreds and thousands assets changing in the world, right? Can you do a caching, right? Then use Sui's way to basically do using one transaction but update tons of things at the same time, right? Queuing them, caching them together. So there's a lot, right? Live ops, what does that mean? Payment rails for games, wallets that's embeddable into different assets, advertise ad tags, right? Think about using this as a way to, sort of, to replace the current advertising model, right? Because you have a more direct relationship between consumers and brands, right? You think about all the things you can do around that, customer engagement, you know, endless possibility, right? So we really want people to kind of open their minds and try to do very different things here.
And are there any plans for privacy-oriented tech or zero-knowledge tech on Sui?
So we believe that's not built into the underlying layer, layer one, right? But we do provide all the necessary crypto primitives for people to build layers on top, right? And I think it's not just privacy. When you talk about privacy, usually the other side of it is compliance, right? So all these things have to come together. One the big strengths here, if you really think about it, is in the future, in the world we're heading in with Web3 is going to be more regulation, and some of the countries' governments, regulatory body coming into the space also want to more regulated guardrails. They want guardrail in place, right? Think about how that would work in the current, let's say using EVM. I hate to pick on it, but let's use the EVM model, right? They always end up saying either you're completely permissionless, right? ERC20 based open protocol and all that, or you completely permission, right? You ensure all the wallets are custodial. Because if you want to create a new standard that's different from ERC20, that require KYC information being passed and being verified for transfer or travel rules, you're kind of dead, right? You either in one world or the other. If you create a new standard, nobody adopt it. It's simple as that, right? Because all the existing protocols are not going to be compliant to it. So many things is going to require a much more complex model that's more mixing the way I describe permissioned assets with permissions protocol, right? Extend that model beyond KYC to copyright verification, to NFT royalty payment checks, right? To this and this and this, right? To maybe some things require third-party witness, right? So that requires very, very different kind of rail. So that also with privacy generates a lot of opportunity and also requires a lot more infrastructure work. What represents, kind of a identity, right? In a pseudonymous model or completely private model, right? And how do you prevent people misusing that, right? What if they use that to circumvent, things we just talked about, paying royalty, right? Because they look like the same person. So lots and lots of complexity. So again, long answer to your short question. We have all these crypto primitive, zero knowledge primitive. People can build all kinds of privacy solution. But when you think about privacy, think about the flip side. It's, this is what it's going to take for this industry to become mainstream, is to understand all the different elements, not just purely on technology, right? This space is too already selling technology product a bit too much, right? Think about technology serving products and products serving humans, and human have to deal with all these different elements, social, economics, legal, right? All business elements, right? So that's how we can make Web3 successful and go mainstream.
Makes sense. And would it make sense for engineers to try to port some of their EVM applications to Sui? And if so, what is the path to doing that? Do they rewrite it in Move, or do they do a transpiler from
yes.
to,
So let me answer the two-part of the question, right? Let's talk about the later. There's no transpiler layer because the concept doesn't transfer in a lot of cases, right? And we don't have dynamic behavior, right? We don't have interface. A lot of things don't transfer. And when you transfer, when you do translate, you're going to make more mistakes, and it's most likely not going to be a very good product. You cannot take advantage, for example, of the parallelism that's possible in Sui, right? Where you have even like, for example, DEX, where your trading pair, each of them can be a separate object, then touching one doesn't impact the rest of them, right? So you can process them, the system will process in parallel. All these things means translation usually is not a kind of direct translation usually doesn't end up in good products. Anyway, we're seeing this over and over again, right? The early iPhone apps translate them from BlackBerry and all that. Nobody really cares about them. They're skeuomorphic at best, right? Now, while we have, but we do welcome people who have built products on EVNs or other chains to come over, and that's a good way, right? Because there's so many of them are interesting suite. And but let move actually try it. It might be a little bit painful at first, right? Because it's so different concept in a lot of way. The models are very different. You have to manipulate objects, right? Everything's an object. It's very different. But then the feedback we're getting was once they get kind of past the initial learning curve, it's really, really a huge productivity game. Like we keep on hearing that. Like we have people saying, well, I was able to build a Pokemon type of game in less time than build a trivial example, like to say Solana. And this is somebody who's a veteran in Solana, right? So we keep on getting the kind of feedback. We know people who have a Rust background or Solidity background can get ramped up in a couple of days. My son is a college kid, student. He learned it in a few hours, right? It's his friends learning a few hours. Yeah, it's really not that scary. But do more than porting.
Yep, that makes sense. And then I guess the last question I had was just around if you kind of just look into the future of Sui, like 5 to 10 years from now, how do you think the world will be different with Sui here? Like what are the future like major applications of blockchain do you think that could be powered by it? And what do you envision the ecosystem to look like 5 or 10 years from now?
Yeah, I think 5 to 10 years, this is what we're hoping for, right? We hope, blockchain and blockchain-based assets and the ability to program them, the ability to transfer them very efficiently, fundamentally change the way people think about building products, right? In 5 years, we hope there will be more example of these major application, major services, where it's not this locked-in model that we're used to today in Web 2, right? That YouTube, like a content distribution platform, right? But it's more of a coordination between, again, producer, consumer, and the platform, right? So that's ultimately what we're about. So that can touch everything, right? Yes, financial systems and product disintermediation is a huge part, right? We'd love to see that be successful. We want to, but honestly, right? We're already seeing gaming being changed, being impacted. People are trying different things. We think commerce will be very, very different because we're going down a path. Otherwise, it's just not good for everybody, right? Commerce right now for small business in particular is difficult, right? Because the flip side of this Apple locking down, for privacy's argument is the cost of acquisition goes through the roof, right? Because your funnel of the data, your customer data getting worse and worse, right? And you see the impact has on the business of Facebook, all that. That's going to change, right? So all these things, all these different industries will change, and blockchain, if done right, is a big part of it. Web3 is a big part of it. So I hope in 5 years that's what happened, and people don't really talk about this is a Sui product or Ethereum product or Solana product. It's just saying this is a product that's a different model, right? It's better for me either as a consumer or as a creator, right? For creators, I have more control of my asset and the distribution or monetization of my creation. That's what I want to see. Yeah, and I think we're going to get there.
That's a very compelling vision, Evan. And you remind me of one last thing, which is in the future, do you think there's going to be multiple versions of the Move language in the future, given that you've made a lot of enhancements to the language for your specific use case?
So the core language is still the same, right? We didn't fork Move, but the programming model is different, right? It's very important for us for language not to fragment, right? It should be this as close as possible. So we'll see, right? We hope that we won't have different variants, different versions of it. You know, but you know, it's hard to predict how these things evolves.
I agree with you. Yeah, I mean, I hope that's the goal too, because if you kind of look at one of the things that's really nice is that there is one Node.js and there's one Ruby on Rails and there's one, you know, PHP, right? And so, you know, I think that will probably help unite the ecosystem if that does occur. So that's a great vision. Thank you. Well, Evan, I know we went over on time. I know how busy you are with your launch. I just want to thank you again for making a difference for the charities today and for helping teach our developers in the audience. We're all very grateful for your time today, and we learned a lot. You did a great job. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, thanks for having me. Thanks for listening to me.
Of course. So audience, we're going to be back in just a minute. I'm going to be giving a presentation to the aspiring engineers in the audience on starting a company. And so that'll be given by me, and I'll be right back with that presentation. So thanks, Evan.